So then, how much warning time do you think you'd actually get when something travelling at 12 times the speed of sound is heading your way? I mean, practically it depends how far away you are, doesn't it? But it's not going to be long. And look, the answer, depending on where you're standing and who's doing the launching, might be maybe enough time to make a phone call, or maybe none. This is a category of weapon that didn't really exist in operational form until the last few years. It's the hypersonic missile. Now, this word gets thrown around a lot, often by people who aren't entirely sure what the word means. So let's be clear about it up front. Hypersonic means faster than Mach 5, which is 5 times the speed of sound. I don't know what Mach 5 is, writer. At sea level, that's about 6,200 kilometers per hour, or, as I'd call it, really, really f***ing quick. Now, fast missiles aren't new, no matter how bloody quick they are. Intercontinental ballistic missiles have been screaming through the upper atmosphere at hypersonic speeds since the 1950s. What's different about the new generation, when people say hypersonic missiles, what they mean is it's all about maneuverability. You see, traditional ballistic missiles, they follow this predictable arc. Up, over, down, kind of like a really expensive and really dangerous cricket ball. You can track them, you can calculate where they're going to land, and if your missile defense system is a little bit of all right, you can put an interceptor in the right place at the right time, saving a lot of pain. Easy. Well, actually, no, enormously complicated, but you know what I mean, easy enough, right? You could do it, Peter, couldn't you? A hypersonic glide vehicle changes that. It gets boosted up by a rocket, just like a regular warhead, but then, instead of falling in this nice, predictable curve, it glides. It can pull up, it can turn, it can skim through the upper atmosphere at altitudes that make it harder to track and speeds that make it harder to intercept. It's kind of the difference between throwing a stone and skipping a stone, except this stone can decide mid-skip to veer left towards a completely different part of the lake, so I guess I need a better analogy? Several countries have been working on this technology: the United States, Russia, China, and now, according to its own oh-so-very enthusiastic state media, North Korea. In January 2025, Pyongyang announced the successful test of what it called a new type intermediate-range hypersonic ballistic missile, the Hwasong-16B, a two-stage, solid-fuel rocket about 21 meters long, carried on a 7-axle mobile launcher, topped with a wedge-shaped glide vehicle that North Korea media claimed reached Mach 12 during its flight over the Sea of Japan, which, don't need to clarify, but it's 12 times the speed of sound. It's really, really fast. That's approximately 14,700 kilometers per hour. At that speed, you can cross the English Channel quite far. It's not the furthest, but it's quite far in 12 seconds. You could travel from London to Edinburgh in roughly 6 minutes. Whether the Hwasong-16B can actually do everything North Korea claims is a matter of significant debate. It is the DPRK. They do love a bit of propaganda. The booster does appear to work. The glide vehicle seems to still be proving itself, but even a partially successful hypersonic program represents a genuine shift in what North Korea can threaten, how quickly it can threaten, and how little warning it can give. Today, we're going to be looking at a country under comprehensive international sanctions with an economy smaller than many mid-sized cities that managed to build a missile designed to outrun the world's most sophisticated defenses. Now look, North Korea didn't wake up one morning with hypersonic missiles, although it probably wished that it could. Getting here took decades of work, a lot of foreign help in the early years, and a regime that decided long ago that nuclear weapons and the means to deliver them were worth almost any price, no matter how hungry everybody is. And I mean, honestly, not good, but also smart. Being a nuclear state just hits different. The story starts in the 1970s and 80s, when Pyongyang began acquiring Scud missiles from Egypt and the Soviet Union. These were short-range, liquid-fueled rockets originally designed in the 50s. Not exactly cutting-edge technology, but enough to threaten South Korea and give the regime a foundation to build on. North Korean engineers studied the Scuds, copied them, modified them, and eventually started producing their own versions. By the 1990s, they were exporting missiles to countries like Iran and Pakistan, which tells you something about how quickly they'd moved from student to supplier. But liquid fuel has some problems. You have to store the propellant separately from the oxidizer because mixing them prematurely tends to cause explosions, which is generally considered, let's say, undesirable in a weapons program. When you're ready to launch, you need to fuel the missile on the pad. That's a process that could take hours and involves trucks, hoses, technicians in hazmat suits, and a lot of visible activity that spy satellites are absolutely going to photograph the out of. If you're trying to maintain a credible nuclear deterrent, having your enemy watch you slowly fill up your missiles like you're at a petrol station is not great. The solid fuel changes all of that. A solid fuel missile comes preloaded with its propellant already packed inside the motor casing, stable and ready to go. You could keep it on a mobile launcher, drive it into a tunnel or a forest, wait for the order, and then fire within minutes. The breakthrough came with the Puck-Gok Song series in the mid-2010s, submarine-launched, land-based missiles that gave their engineers real experience with large-diameter solid rocket motors. The early tests had mixed results, plenty of failures alongside the successes, but each one taught them something. By the end of the decade, they had a working solid fuel technology base that could be scaled up for bigger, longer-range systems. Around 2021, Kim Jong-un announced what you might call a military shopping list for the next 5 years. Solid fuel intercontinental ballistic missiles, hypersonic weapons, submarine-launched nuclear delivery systems, tactical nuclear warheads for battlefield use. By mid-2024, outside analysts estimated that North Korea had actually assembled somewhere around 50 nuclear warheads and was actively developing 13 new systems to carry them. Again, no matter how hungry everybody is. Now, the hypersonic part of that list deserves special attention because it represents a different kind of threat than simply building bigger rockets. Like we said, hypersonics don't follow a ballistic arc. They glide through the upper atmosphere at speeds above Mach 5, maneuvering, pulling up, turning, changing altitude. If you're a missile defense operator and you're trying to predict where a warhead will land, that maneuverability is a nightmare. And obviously, that's exactly what Kim wanted. Now, the naming of all of this gets a bit confusing, so let's sort it out, shall we? Back in October 2020, North Korea rolled an absolutely enormous liquid-fueled ICBM through a parade in Pyongyang, and analysts initially nicknamed it the Hwasong-16. Later, that missile was officially designated the Hwasong-17. In November 2023, North Korean state media announced successful ground tests of solid-fuel rocket motors for a new intermediate-range ballistic missile, and by January 2024, they were conducting flight tests. The first version, equipped with a maneuverable re-entry vehicle rather than a true hypersonic glider, is usually called the Hwasong-16A by outside analysts. The version with the hypersonic glide vehicle on top became the Hwasong-16B. By early 2024, North Korea had a solid fuel booster that could reach intermediate ranges, a political mandate to develop hypersonic weapons, and years of experience building increasingly impressive missiles. What it wanted next was a system that could threaten US bases across the Pacific, from Japan to Guam and beyond, while giving missile operators as little time and as much uncertainty as possible. That's the gap the Hwasong-16B was designed to fill. So let's talk about what this thing actually looks like, because the engineering choices tell you a lot about what North Korea is trying to achieve. The Hwasong-16B stands about 21 meters tall, roughly the length of 2 London double-decker buses parked nose to tail. The missile has 2 stages, both solid-fueled. The first stage is about 10.6 meters long and does the heavy lifting, burning during the initial phases of flight to get the missile up and moving fast. The second stage, around 5.6 meters, takes over after the first stage separates, pushing the payload to its final velocity before releasing it to glide toward the target. 2 stages is fairly standard for this class of missile. You get the range of a longer burn without the diminishing returns of hauling empty fuel tanks all the way to impact. The launch is also quite interesting. The Hwasong-16B rides on a 7-axle transporter erector launcher, a massive truck designed to carry the missile horizontally, drive it to a launch site, raise it vertical, and fire. The missile sits inside a canister with clamshell covers that open at the front, protecting it during transport and keeping it ready without exposure to the elements. The whole system is road mobile, which means it can be hidden in tunnels, parked under highway overpasses, tucked into forests, or driven into any building with a tall enough door. Compared to a fixed silo, which shows up on satellite imagery and stays in the same place forever, a mobile launcher is a much harder target to find and destroy before it lets off a missile. The launch method itself is what engineers call a cold launch. Instead of igniting the rocket motor while the missile is still in the canister, a gas generator at the bottom of the tube creates a burst of pressure that pops the missile out like a cork from a champagne bottle. Once it's clear of the launcher and a safe distance into the air, the first stage motor ignites. This approach is gentler on the equipment, reduces heat and blast damage, and means the same vehicle can potentially be reloaded and used again, although how quickly North Korea could actually do that in practice is an open question. Both stages use solid propellant packed into motor casings. According to North Korean state media reporting on the January 2025 test, the motor casings are now made from a composite carbon fiber material rather than traditional steel or aluminium alloys. That means you get the same basic structure, but it's lighter and stronger for its weight, which means you can either carry more payload, fly farther, or both. Carbon fiber composites also handle heat better than some metals, which matters when you're containing a controlled explosion for several minutes of powered flight. Okay, so the booster gets the missile moving. What about the payload at the top of the thing? The Hwasong 16B carries a wedge-shaped hypersonic glide vehicle that looks visually similar to one North Korea previously tested on its Hwasong 8, a smaller liquid-fueled missile from a few years earlier. After the second stage finishes burning, the glide vehicle separates and re-enters the upper atmosphere. From there, instead of following that predictable arc, it performs what North Korean media describes as pull-up maneuvers to change altitude and turns to shift its trajectory sidewards. And here's the thing about the Hwasong 16 family. The same basic booster can carry different payloads depending on what North Korea wants to achieve. The 16A variant carries a maneuverable re-entry vehicle which can make adjustments during descent, but doesn't glide the way a true hypersonic glide vehicle does. There's also been at least one test in June 2024 where the first stage was used to deploy what appeared to be a multiple independently targetable re-entry vehicle nose cone, essentially an attempt to release several warheads at once. Brilliant. North Korea claims that the test was a success. South Korean and Japanese assessments suggest the vehicle broke apart mid-flight in an uncontrolled way. Who do we believe? Either way, the point here is the Hwasong 16 is really a platform. It's a modular system configurable for different missions rather than a single fixed design. So let's now talk about its performance, shall we? Based on the booster's size and general engineering estimates, outside analysts believe the Hwasong 16B has a potential range somewhere between 3,000 and 5,500 kilometers, putting it firmly in the intermediate range ballistic missile category. The actual test flights so far have been considerably shorter, around 600 kilometers for the April 2024 test and roughly 1,100 for the January 2025 test, though North Korean figures claim closer to 1,000 and 1,500 kilometers respectively, because of course they do. The gap between North Korean claims and Allied tracking data is a little bit of a recurring theme. External assessments of the 2024 flight put the maximum velocity at around Mach 5, technically hypersonic, but just barely squeaking in. The January 2025 test was faster, with both North Korean media and independent analysis suggesting the glide vehicle reach approximately Mach 12, or 14,700 kilometers per hour. At that speed, covering 1,100 kilometers takes somewhere in the neighborhood of 4 to 5 minutes. Scale that up to the projected maximum range of 3,000 plus kilometers, and you're looking at flight times of 10 to 15 minutes from launch to impact. The warhead options include nuclear or conventional payloads, and North Korean state media has been characteristically modest about the achievement, describing the hypersonic glide vehicle as a, quoting here, technical force which is by no means easy to achieve, and noting that, quoting again, only a few countries in the world might possess such technology. Whether the glide vehicle can actually do everything Pyongyang claims, including the complex maneuvers and the full range of performance, is something the test record has yet to fully demonstrate. You see, building a hypersonic missile is one thing. Proving it works, though, is another matter entirely. The testing program for the Hwasong 16 family kicked off on January 14, 2024, though that first test flight wasn't carrying a hypersonic glide vehicle at all. North Korea launched what analysts now call the Hwasong 16A, a solid-fuel intermediate-range missile equipped with a maneuverable re-entry vehicle rather than the fancier hypersonic glider. South Korean officials tracked it traveling approximately 1,000 kilometers, while Japanese assessments were more conservative, reporting at least 500 kilometers and an altitude of around 50 kilometers. The technical community watched this one rather closely, not because the payload was particularly revolutionary, but because it marked the first full flight of the new solid-fuel booster. If the rocket worked, North Korea had a platform. If it failed spectacularly, the hypersonic ambitions would need to wait. And, well, bad news for us, good news for North Korea. the rocket worked. The Hwasong 16B made its debut on April 2nd, 2024, and North Korean state media was predictably enthusiastic. KCNA announced the, quote, first test fire of Hwasong 16NA, a new type of intermediate-range solid-fueled ballistic missile loaded with newly developed hypersonic glide vehicle. It's a bit of a mouthful. Took me more than one take, but it gets the essential information across, doesn't it? According to Pyongyang's version of events, the missile flew 1,000 kilometers, reached a maximum altitude of 101.1 kilometers, performed a pull-up maneuver to a second apogee of 72.3 kilometers, and demonstrated cross-range maneuvering over the Sea of Japan. There's lots of mouthfuls today, isn't there? And look, all of this is very impressive if it's true. I mean, Pyongyang's version of event is definitely doing some heavy lifting there. External assessments told a different story. South Korean and Japanese tracking data suggested the missile actually flew around 600 kilometers, not 1,000, with a single apogee near 100 kilometers and no clear evidence of the dramatic second peak that North Korea described. The estimated maximum speed came in at around Mach 5. Some analysts proposed an explanation worth considering. According to reporting from Daily NK, which maintains sources inside North Korea, the 1,000-kilometer figure was based on computer simulations of what the missile could do, not what it actually did during that particular flight. A high-ranking source told the outlet that speed and altitude were deliberately limited for safety reasons, essentially flying a restrained profile while North Korea gathered data and, just as importantly, watched how its adversaries reacted, which is a convenient story, isn't it? That source identified 3 goals for the April test beyond simply proving the hardware worked. First, probe how well the United States, South Korea, and Japan could detect and characterize the flight, essentially gathering intelligence on their intelligence gathering. Second, create doubt about whether Allied radar systems could reliably track a maneuvering hypersonic target, which is valuable for deterrence even if the test itself was modest. Third, send a message that US bases in Guam, Hawaii, and Okinawa were now within potential striking distance. Even a partially successful test can achieve quite a lot when your goal includes psychological impact alongside technical validation. The timing reinforced that message rather nicely. The April 2024 test coincided with a trilateral air exercise involving the United States, Japan, and South Korea, the kind of coordinated military activity that Pyongyang views as a direct threat. Launching a new hypersonic-capable missile right as your adversaries are practicing cooperation is, well, it's not exactly subtle, is it, guys? But subtlety was not the priority. Then came the January 6, 2025 test, and this one showed genuine progress. North Korean media announced the launch of a new type intermediate-range hypersonic ballistic missile from somewhere near Pyongyang, claiming a range of 1,500 kilometers, a first apogee of 99.8 kilometers, a second apogee of 42.5, and that maximum speed of Mach 12. Japanese and South Korea tracking data put the range a little bit lower, but the speed figures aligned with what North Korea was claiming. Mach 12 is genuinely really bloody fast, and it represents a significant step up from Mach 5. Van Diepen, a former US intelligence official who now analyzes North Korean missiles for 38 North, described the state of play after that January test as half a loaf. The solid fuel booster, he argued, appears to be performing well enough that North Korea could reasonably deploy it operationally. It works at useful ranges, it reaches useful speeds, and the mobile launcher gives it the survivability Pyongyang wants. The hypersonic glide vehicle sitting on top of that booster, however, has not yet demonstrated all the advanced maneuvering capabilities North Korea claims. The complex pull-ups, cross-range jinking, and extended glide profiles described in state media remain assertions rather than observed facts. Van Diepen suggests the HGV likely needs some more successful tests before anyone should consider it a fully mature system. The January 2025 test also reportedly featured technical upgrades beyond pushing the envelope on speed and range. North Korean media mentioned new carbon fiber motor casings and updated guidance technology, though outside analysts can only assess so much from launch footage and telemetry estimates. What they can't assess is that North Korea is iterating quickly, learning from each test, and closing gaps that existed just a year or two ago. The political messaging around that test was about as restrained as you would expect, which is to say it wasn't restrained at all. North Korean statements framed the launch as a demonstration that the country is, quote, fully ready to use any means, end quote, to defend its interests, a line aimed squarely at Washington, Tokyo, and Seoul. Whether the Hwasong 16B is actually ready for operational use in a conflict remains debatable. Whether North Korea wants everyone to believe it's ready, that part seems really rather clear. No surprises there. Now, the term intermediate range ballistic missile does have a specific definition in arms control circles. It's a missile with a range of between 3,000 and 5,500 kilometers. Based on the Hwasong-16B's booster size and general engineering principles, analysts at CSIS estimate the system could plausibly reach the upper end of that bracket, somewhere around 5,500 kilometers if everything performs optimally. But every test flight so far has covered way less than that, about 1,000 to 1,100 kilometers, and those were apparently constrained profiles designed for safety and data collection rather than maximum range demonstrations. Some analysts argue that if the missile can't actually reach IRBM distances while carrying a hypersonic glide vehicle, it might be operationally closer to a medium-range system. The distinction matters for treaty purposes and threat assessments, but the underlying technology remains concerning regardless of which category it technically falls into. And with all of that in mind, let's draw a map, shall we? If you put a center point on Pyongyang and draw a big circle with a radius of 3,000 kilometers, you've covered all of Japan, including every US military installation on the main islands and Okinawa. Extend that radius to 4,000 kilometers and you've reached Guam, home to Andersen Air Force Base and Naval Base Guam, both critical staging areas for any American response to a conflict on the Korean Peninsula. Push out to 5,500 kilometers and you're touching parts of the Philippines, chunks of Far Eastern Russia, and potentially the Aleutian Islands at the western tip of Alaska. That's the threat envelope the Hwasong-16B is designed to fill. Not the continental United States, not yet, but the network of bases, allies, and staging areas that American military planners would rely on in any Pacific conflict. Guam shows up repeatedly in North Korean propaganda and military planning because it hosts bombers, submarines, and logistics infrastructure that could project power toward the Korean Peninsula within hours. Holding Guam at risk changes the calculations for everyone involved. Missile defense exists for a reason, and it's worth understanding how these systems work before we talk about how hypersonics complicate them. The basic principle behind systems like Aegis, THAAD, and Patriot is straightforward. Detect a launch as early as possible, track the trajectory, predict where it's going to be at some point in the future, put an interceptor in that spot at the right moment, ba-boom, and with that, boom, it's done. Simple. But in concept, it's simple. The execution involves extremely sophisticated radars, split-second computing, and interceptors that cost millions of dollars per piece, and have to hit a target moving at ridiculous speeds. Against traditional ballistic missiles following predictable arcs, these systems have demonstrated reasonable success in testing. Real-world performance in an actual conflict would depend on how many missiles are coming, how much warning time is available, and whether the radars can keep track through countermeasures and debris. That doesn't make it impossible to intercept, though. US officials are careful to describe hypersonic weapons as challenging rather than unstoppable. But it forces defenders to track continuously rather than predict early, make decisions later in the flight when reaction time is tighter, and potentially fire more interceptors to cover a wider range of possible endpoints. For a place like Guam, where warning times are already measured in minutes, those complications matter enormously. Looking forward, open source analysts have suggested the Hwasong-16 platform could potentially be upgraded to reach even greater distances if North Korean engineers reduce structural weight through more advanced composites and switch to higher energy propellants. The same basic booster architecture might eventually achieve ranges of 6,000 to 8,000 kilometers, pushing into true intercontinental territory. That's projection rather than demonstrated fact, but the June 2024 MERV experiment suggests they're thinking about exactly these kinds of upgrades. Multiple, independently targetable re-entry vehicles would be particularly useful against missile defense installations, allowing a single missile to threaten several radar sites or interceptor batteries simultaneously. The strategic logic, according to analysts at 38 North and CSIS, is that HGV-equipped Hwasong-16Bs probably won't be deployed in huge numbers, even if the technology matures. They're expensive, they're technically demanding, and their advantages are mostly relevant against specific, high-value targets like missile defense radars and key military bases. Many of the boosters in North Korea's arsenal would more likely carry simple, maneuverable re-entry vehicles or conventional warheads aimed at ports, airfields, and logistics hubs. The HGV variant is a specialist tool designed to punch through defenses and hit the targets that enable American power projection in the Western Pacific. For the people living within that expanding circle, from Pyongyang, whether in Tokyo, Okinawa, Guam, or potentially further, the technical debates about range brackets and glide vehicle performance are somewhat academic. What matters is that a nuclear-armed country with a history of provocative behavior is developing missiles specifically designed to make existing defenses less reliable and warning times a lot shorter. Indeed, in July 2024, North Korea issued postage stamps featuring the Hwasong-16B, the kind of commemorative gesture usually reserved for space achievements and major anniversaries. If you wanted to signal that a missile program sits at the very heart of national identity, you'd be hard-pressed to do it more clearly than putting it on the fucking stamps. And look, the international response to all of this has been predictable but largely toothless. The United Kingdom, Japan, South Korea, and the United States have all condemned the test as violation of the UN Security Council resolutions and threats to regional stability. Those resolutions prohibit North Korea from developing ballistic missile technology, but enforcement mechanisms are rather limited, and previous sanctions have not exactly stopped North Korea, have they? There's also the question of outside help. Reporting from the Washington Post in 2025 suggests that Russia had been assisting North Korea in expanding its missile and drone capabilities, part of a broader relationship where Pyongyang provides artillery shells and other military support for Russia's war in Ukraine, and Moscow reciprocates with technical expertise and possibly hardware. The exact nature of any technology transfers remain opaque, since neither government is exactly forthcoming about the details, but the concern among Western analysts is that Russian assistance could help North Korea close gaps more quickly than it would on its own, particularly in areas like solid propellants, guidance systems, and the tricky business of building reliable multiple warhead delivery systems. Now, look, none of this is confirmed in court evidence, but the trajectory of North Korean capabilities alongside the timing of closer Russia DPRK ties hasn't exactly gone unnoticed. And, of course, the tests continue. Thank you for watching.